I can't hear you.
Somebody always has to accidentally be on mute for these things, so I offer myself up as a sacrifice.
It's the only way it works.
Yeah, that's it. We got that out of the way already.
Yay! You can mute me anytime. Most people would like to do that.
I would never mute you, Edie. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. This is Lunch and Learn.
My name is Edie Evans, and I am the director of Rappahannock CASA. And we are a local nonprofit that provides advocacy for children who've been abused or neglected.
Let me just introduce myself as well.
Oh, sorry, Lee.
I'll be required. That's okay. I'm Lee Criscolo. I'm the head of adult services at the Howell branch of the library. And now we'll go back to Edie, she's going to tell us all about Rappahannock CASA.
Yeah, so we were founded in 1990 here in the Fredericksburg region. We serve the city of Fredericksburg and Stafford, Spotsylvania, and King George counties. And essentially what we do is we take caring, committed adults and train them how to be volunteer personal advocates for kids who have been abused or neglected. And so the judges in those communities appoint our program to these cases when they get a case before them where there's an allegation of abuse or neglect. And we essentially train our volunteers to meet with the children at the heart of these cases, at least monthly, wherever it is they're living, learn a little bit about them, serve as kind of a support to them during a particularly difficult time. And then also they have this sort of weighty job, which is to provide information to the court about how these children are doing and any services we think they might benefit from. Most of the kids we serve have been through some sort of trauma. A lot of them are in foster care, which is its own trauma. And so a big part of what we do is we have our volunteers speak to not just the children, but their service providers. So our advocates are speaking with their teachers, their therapists, mentors, pediatricians, parents, foster parents, anybody who is sort of in that child's orbit to get a sense of how they're doing with everything that's going on, any services that might help them kind of move forward with their lives. And then we're making recommendations about those services to the court. Basically, the idea is to remind everybody involved in the process that we're only there because of the needs of these children. And we really want the best interests of the children to be what kind of rules the case. And so the judges appoint us to these cases because they want to hear from members of the community how these children are doing. And we hope that we're providing sort of a three-dimensional picture of these children, many of whom will never meet these judges during the course of the case. But a lot of them are old enough and savvy enough to understand that they're being spoken about behind closed doors, and they want to have a say in the process. And that's essentially what our volunteers are trying to do, is make sure that the children's concerns, their desires, their worries, that those make it to the judge, along with everything else that's happening in the case. So the judge is aware of, what they might want and what they might need, and so that those things are being ordered for them. We have a long history in the country, actually. We're part of a large network of nearly 1,000 programs across the country. We were founded in 1977 by a family court judge in Seattle, Judge Sukup, who passed away about 2 years ago now. But he felt like he was making these really weighty decisions about the lives of children. And he was doing it in rooms that were dominated by attorneys and social workers. And he was worried that he wasn't really hearing from the children at the heart of the case, or somebody who could speak to the needs and desires of the children. So he recruited a bunch of his friends to basically serve as friends of the court. And he sent them out into the community to meet with these kiddos and find out, what was really going on in their lives from their perspective and what they wanted to have happen at the end of these cases. And then he would use that information in addition to the information that was provided to him by social workers and attorneys in the case. And he felt like he was able to come to a better conclusion, one that included the children's voices in the process. And so it was such a popular program that it grew across the country. We are one of 27 similar programs in the state of Virginia. we're a nonprofit. We're a 501c3, and some of the other programs around the country are also 501c3s. There are a few programs that are government run as well, or under the umbrella of, like a child advocacy center. But we got started. Judge Dean Lewis down in Spotsylvania was the judge here in our region who decided that she wanted to have a program like that before, she was making these kind of weighty decisions. And so she recruited Bev Evans, who was our founding director. And then when Bev retired, I want to say around 1997, Bev's daughter, Jill Payne, took over our program, and she was the director until 2013. And then she stepped back into a case manager role, and Janet Watkins was our director. And then Janet took a different job in 2023. So I've been the director since July 23.
I think Janet was the one that I actually was a volunteer CASA for a
Yes,
few
you
years.
were.
I think Janet was the one who recommended that I do that. And
That's right.
I
That's right.
figured, well, if Janet thinks I can do this, which sounded like an incredibly scary, difficult, thing to do, then I guess she knows better than I do what's involved. So I figured, well, okay, I'll give it a try. And the training that I got as a volunteer and the support from the CASA office was just amazing, and the kids were amazing. They were going through really difficult stuff, but they were just it was a really, really good experience. I'm really glad I did it.
That's it. It's, I think both Janet and Jill referred to it as, volunteerism on steroids. It is a big lift. We ask for a pretty generous commitment from our volunteers that they give us at least a year's service. All of our volunteers have to go through roughly 35 hours of training before they ever get a case. And so they learn a lot about the child welfare system, how families come, to even be sort of noticed by Child Protective Services, how those concerns come in, how Child Protective Services works, what has to happen before a child enters foster care. They learned a lot about, childhood trauma, or, we call them ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And the majority of the population has been exposed to sort of one adverse experience. Roughly everybody can say, well, my parents were divorced, or, well, I had a parent with mental health issues. The kids we're serving often have much higher ACE scores. So they've been exposed to quite a bit of trauma. Some of them have endured physical abuse. A lot of them have endured neglect. They've seen a parent maybe overdose, or they've seen substance abuse in their home. We're seeing a real rise in the number of children who have witnessed domestic violence. And so all of that has these sort of long-term health and mental health impacts on children. And so really one of the things that we are trying to raise awareness of, particularly amongst our volunteer corps, is what does that trauma look like? And how can we treat it while the children are young, so that when they get to be adults, this cycle isn't repeated with their own kids, or they're not suffering from untreated trauma, which unfortunately we see in a lot of our parents. Sometimes you'll have a child who's entered foster care because their parents, their home is unsafe for some reason. And those parents, in cooperating in services, maybe they're meeting with a therapist, or maybe they're having a psychological evaluation done. And it turns out that they endured childhood trauma. And that's when we realize, oh my gosh, these behaviors that we're seeing from the parent, there's a reason for them. And we don't want the children to grow up and repeat those same behaviors. And so now we're trying to get services for the parents, but also for these kiddos, so that when they become adults, they have a different path forward than perhaps their parents or grandparents, or sometimes great-grandparents had. And so we're sort of educating them what they might see in a case before they ever, are sworn in by a judge and then go out and meet these children for the first time. But the truth is, every case is kind of its own situation. And so no matter how much training goes in, we talk about it a little bit like swimming, right? You're in a class and we're teaching you how to move your arms and legs, but it's all theoretical until you get in the pool and start actually having to keep your head above the water. And so that's really what our staff does. Is it's the volunteer advocate's case. But our staff really tries to support them. And so when they call us and say, oh my gosh, my child that I'm serving is exhibiting these behaviors, or oh my gosh, the child has these challenges. We're sort of there to say, okay, here are the programs that exist in our community that can maybe help that child, or can maybe help the foster parents help that child, so that again, so they don't grow up to be adults with untreated trauma.
Right.
Um, we are in addition to the 35 hours of advanced training they get, our volunteers have to do 12 hours every year of ongoing education. And so they're learning about, what it might take to help a child get an individualized education plan in their school setting, what it might take to, you know, uh, uh, recommend that a pediatrician do maybe an evaluation to see if a child is on the autism spectrum. They're learning about all these sort of different avenues of advocacy that they could take throughout the course of their case, and it helps them be better advocates. But often they're the person in the room. We might go to a meeting, or we might go to a court hearing, and everybody is focused on the adults, the parents, because the parents are asked to make changes, right, to make their home safer and more stable. And so oftentimes the parents are kind of the focus of these meetings or these hearings, and the judge wants to know, how are the parents doing with the things that I've ordered them to do? And we're kind of there to remind them that at the center of the case is a child or a sibling group. And they need to be the focus, right? And so the parents might be making progress, and we think that's wonderful, or they might not be, and we might be urging the system to kind of look in a different direction. If we don't think that these parents are going to be able to do the things the court has asked them to do to make their home safer, we might be the ones in the room saying, okay, now it's really time to look at, is there a loving relative who could step up and care for this child and keep them in a family, setting, so that they could still have a relationship with their parents, but have it be more stable and more safe. And if not, is there an adoptive family waiting in the wings for this child? Maybe their foster parents have bonded with this child, and the child feels safe there. And we think that maybe ultimately that might be the best move for this child. But we're really trying to keep the child at the center of the process.
One of the things that I like and think is really helpful is that, the child just has one CASA for the whole case. They might have different social workers, different judges, different this and that, but they have, one CASA who's been with them through the whole process.
Right. And that's one of the gifts I think that our program kind of brings to the table, is that gift of time and consistency. Our social workers in the state of Virginia, some of them have 24 kids on their caseload, and they have to visit those kiddos, at least once a month. They have to see to all the services that those kiddos need. They have to check in with their foster parents. It's a lot. And we have a fairly high vacancy rate. I think there's a 40% vacancy rate right now within the Virginia Department of Social Services, and a 20% turnover rate. So you might have a social worker who comes into a Department of Social Services, gets trained, has some cases, and then maybe gets an offer from a different Department of Social Services where they're paying a little more money, or maybe a smaller caseload. And so all of a sudden they're gone. And what we like to bring to the table is that consistency. So if I put you on a case as a CASA, I'm asking you to commit to finishing that case, which could go on for a year, sometimes a year and a half. These cases will go. And so we're asking for the CASAs to remain on these cases the entire time, because like you said, the social worker might change 3 or 4 times throughout a case. That child might bounce through several different foster homes, or maybe they're in a group home or a facility, and then they step down to a foster home, and then they move to a different setting. And that's hard on a kiddo, right? To have all these people kind of coming in and out of their lives during a time that is already traumatic, because they may not be placed with their parents. And so we really like for that CASA to be the person who keeps showing up for them, who is a consistent, responsible adult presence in their life, somebody they can count on, who is going to be there month after month after month. We want that person to be checking in again with all of their service providers, because sometimes we get to the end of a case and the CASA is the only adult who's been there from day one. And so has that sort of institutional memory when it comes to the family, when it comes to the services that have been tried and maybe did work or didn't work. And so sometimes we're able to say to the 3rd or 4th social worker, hey, that program you're looking at, we already tried that, and it didn't work with mom's work schedule. And so that was going to be a complication. Let's try something else. Um, we make regular reports to the court. That's a big part of what we do, that include kind of updates on how the child's doing, how the parents are doing, any recommendations that we're making going forward. Um, Judges traditionally approve most of the recommendations that we've made. But one of the things we do in those reports is on the front page, we have a picture of the child, a new picture of the child, to show the judge that time is passing and this child needs certainty and permanency in their life. And so we don't necessarily want to wait another 6 months for another court hearing to get there. We want some solid ground under these children's feet right now. The other thing we include in that report is the number of hours that the CASA has put into that case. And usually it's going to be more than anybody else. It can be 300, 400, 500 hours, depending on how long that case has gone on. And that lets the judge know, we've talked to a lot of people, we've looked at a lot of documents, we've spent a lot of time with this child and their family. And so our recommendations aren't fly by night. They're invested time that we've had with this family. We have rules, of course, that we have to follow. I mean, we're governed by the Department of Criminal Justice Services in the state of Virginia. We also have rules that are recommended by National CASA. And so we have these benchmarks that we need to live up to. We require a lot of our volunteers. But I think the biggest piece that we bring is time. Because if you're a CASA, you're going to have one child or one sibling group that you're responsible for. If you're a social worker or a guardian ad litem, who in Virginia is the child's attorney, you might have dozens of kids that you're responsible for. And you can only do so much. There's only 24 hours in a day. And so we like to feel like we are assisting the system in keeping its eyes on the kiddos. And that's just, like I said, it's something that we bring to the table that not everybody else can offer, because they are so busy, because they are so overworked.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So,
that's a lot. That's a lot.
It is. I mean, I think most of our volunteers will tell you that it is, it's worth the effort. It's worth the time. Not every case is going to be a happy ending, right? But we're kind of there to make sure that, to the extent that we can, that most cases end with what we think is going to be in the best interests of that child going forward, whether it's, that they get to go back to parents who've made a tremendous amount of improvement, or whether it's maybe mom and dad can't make the changes, but there's an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent who is safe and stable and sober and can raise that child, and can set boundaries with those parents so that when they're healthy, they can have contact with that child. And sometimes there isn't that, and we're looking at an adoptive family, but that's a family that's going to nurture and love them, and raise them in a safe environment. And of course, that's what you want for every child, right? For them to grow up feeling safe and loved and stable. And so that is, kind of our focus, is to make sure that kids end up in permanent, safe, loving homes where they're never harmed again. That's the gold standard. So
I'm just going to put the CASA website back up.
Yeah.
Anybody is interested in contacting you, getting information about maybe volunteering, or if they don't feel like they can volunteer, maybe they want to just contribute monetarily.
Absolutely. I mean, we're a nonprofit, right? And so we rely on donations from individuals. We rely on grants. Our community foundation has been a godsend for us. We get some money from the state. We get a little bit of money from the Victims of Crime Act grant, which are not taxpayer dollars. Those are dollars that convicted criminals are forced to pay, the fines and things that come with their convictions. And then we rely on the goodwill, basically, of our community, of our citizens, to help us out. We have a fundraiser every year. The Fredericksburg Area Running Club has been amazing. They organize a 1 mile race for us every fall called the Downtown Mile for CASA. It's a great little run through downtown Fredericksburg. And the people that show up for that are fabulous. The last heat of that run is a superhero run. So people put on their capes and their tights and silly costumes and just have a good time of it. But yeah, it's incredible. I mean, to see, it's a 1 mile run, but some of these kids can do it in like under 5 minutes, which is mind blowing, quite frankly.
Yeah, that would not be me.
No, me either. But I'm there at the
That's
finish line to
Zoom.
cheer them on. So, um, yeah, so we have a fundraiser, and of course Giving Tuesday, and we reach out to folks. Um, but yeah, we tend to think of ourselves as kind of the community's conscience. We're just regular folks who live in this community, who look at these kids as if they were ours, right? What would you want for that child if that was your child in foster care, or your child who is now living under a protective order? What would you want to know about them? What would you want for them? And then we send our amazing advocates out into the community with that mindset. And we couldn't do this without our volunteers. They are some of the most incredible people you'll ever meet, including you, Lee. I remember some of your cases; they were not easy.
They were interesting. They were not easy. Some of them were easier than others, but they were definitely fascinating, and I definitely feel like I made a worthwhile contribution.
You absolutely did.
Lives, so.
You did. And we hear from judges all the time that, they read these reports, and the information in them is a little bit different sometimes than the information that a guardian is bringing to the court.
Right.
They're mostly focused on the law, and, and different from the information that DSS is going to bring to the court, because they're going to focus on their process and their policy, and how are the parents, doing in meeting the plan. And we're really just there to kind of paint these people as three-dimensional human beings with all of their challenges and all of the amazing things that they do. And, we want the judges to remember that these are humans that are before them, and little humans don't often have a lot of say in what's happening in their lives. And we are really trying to empower these kids to tell us what they want, tell us what they need, or show us what they need and want, and we'll take care of the rest of it for them.
I had one case involving teenagers, and they were able to write their own letter to the judge.
That's right. We encourage the kids, to really share what it is that they want to see happen. We don't always agree with them. I mean, sometimes we say in a report to the court, little Johnny would desperately like to go home to his parents, and we're not recommending that at this time because we think the parents still have a little bit of work to do. But when we tell the kids, we will tell the court what it is that you want. We owe it to them to follow through on that. They're not necessarily going to get an audience with the judge until the end of the case, if ever. Some of them are very young, right? And so you're not going to have a 2-year-old come in and talk to a judge. But a 2-year-old can show you in their behavior what it is that they want, what it is that they need. And so we train our advocates to really watch them, to observe them closely, and to use that information to kind of translate, okay, this is what we think this child is trying to tell us with their behaviors. And so we need to meet them where they are and give them what they need. Again, so that when they grow up, this trauma doesn't define them.
Yeah.
Right. It informs them, but it doesn't have to define who they are. We often talk in training a lot about how you'll see a situation and go, well, somebody should do something about that. And it may be that somebody is you, just a regular person who cares. Honestly, we can teach you the rest. But if you're a person who cares about the welfare of children, that's really kind of the only, initial requirement that you need.
Prerequisite.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you for sharing all this with us, Edie.
Thank you so much. We have volunteer training sessions a couple of times a year. We usually post them on our website, so please visit. If you're all curious about how to do it, go to our website. You'll learn a little bit, and then you can always reach out to us at rappcasa@gmail.com. That's RAPPCASA@gmail.com. Or you can give us a call at 540-710-6199. And again, all that is on our website. So
wonderful.
Look forward to meeting you.
And Edie is great to be supervised by.
Thank you so much, Lee. We're a small staff, and like I said, we rely heavily on our volunteers, but we are there to help and guide. So That's what we're there for, is to support our advocates while they support these children.
All right. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up now.
Okay.
Thank you again. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Lee. We really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. I'm going to sign off here.